The Boy and the Heron is the latest and possibly last Ghibli film from Hayao Miyazaki, although the 83-year-old director has retired before and returned again to make new movies. And that's relevant here, in speaking about his film perhaps, more so than the others, because this is reputed to be his story, based more on his personal life than any of his previous works. Miyazaki grew up in bombed-out cities in Japan, and his mother gave him the book, which inspired the screenplay many years later, just as the boy Mahito's mother in the film does. But these factual details of the main character seem somehow incidental when placed alongside the actual story of The Boy and the Heron, a fantastical story that's even hard to put into words at times. But I think that's part of the point. This isn't so much his story in any factual sense as it is his personal, internal story of his creative evolution, perhaps, and artistic aspirations, and generally what it feels like to be Hayao Miyazaki. In the film, when a young Mahito loses his mother in a hospital fire, his life changes in some profound ways. His father remarries his mother's sister, the pregnant Natsuko, which was sometimes a tradition, and then they all move out to the country, in part so that Mahito can remain in school. But also Mahito has become disillusioned, angry, and bitter. He fights with the other boys at school, and at one point engages in self-harm for reasons that aren't immediately clear. It seems like it's to exaggerate his injuries from fighting with the other boys, but then he denies that and claims to have fallen down. When Mahito bashes himself with a rock in a sort of trance-like state, what does become clear is that Mahito is suffering inside, with grief and self-image and guilt perhaps. The wound on his head, instead of healing throughout the course of the film, becomes emblematic of his deeper spiritual wounds, but also of Mahito's self-defining struggle. He's injured himself with a somewhat inert rock, but later on we see rocks literally buzzing with life and the elemental energy of storytelling itself. But in the end, the rock to the head, the blunt try at adding meaning to the soul, is ineffective, since art and meaning don't enter through the head, but through experience, through the heart. And the mistries at meaning in all of our lives leave scars. We see in his hand at the end a totem of his friend Kuriko, who shared in his adventure and awakening in the dream realm. But in the ordinary world, she is practically anonymous. Kuriko appears as her younger self in her own storyline, as a heroic figure, showing that appearances are just skin-deep, products not of a prime reality, there is none, but of particular moments in time that we all share and must pass through. And her totem is the more powerful of the two things he brings home, the transformative power of other people. The heron, who appears around Mahito's new home, is one of many types of birds that appear in the film. He intrigues Mahito with news that his mother is not, in fact, dead, and if he follows him to a nearby tower, built long ago by his mysterious great-uncle, he'll lead him to her. Once there, we realize that we're entering a new dimension, a crossroads of time and space, and especially of lifelines and life stories, the tower being a sort of prism for all the characters' lives, so that Mahito must grow and gain new perspectives. He meets the great uncle, who remains mysterious for a while, bidding the heron to be Mahito's guide through the realm. Soon he also encounters the mysterious fire spirit, Himi, who saves them at certain moments, remember now, with her fire. I wonder who she's related to. We also get a pattern here of birds also becoming emblematic of different types of people or aspects of different human tendencies. There are pelicans who seem voracious and dangerous, but are seen later more compassionately. The one pelican Mahito corners tells him, "We didn't ask to be pelicans. We feed on the wara wara," which are these unborn spirits who seem to cycle through reality and back again in sort of a reincarnation cycle, rising up to Mahito's in our world to be born as people. But here, they're being fed on by birds. And he teaches Mahito another perspective about appearances of good and evil, telling him, hey, we're just starving. And this creation has only provided us with this one survival mode. So Mahito progresses there on a journey towards empathy and gratitude for life in all its forms, instead of casting heroes and villains so much. He eventually, through encounters like these, understands how each person is essentially just playing the hand they're dealt, so to speak. And this becomes important because he has to come to some grips with Natsuko, his stepmom, who he resents taking his mother's place, but who's only following the path that's open to her. Then there's also the Parakeets, the insatiable, colorful, vacuous, and kaleidoscopic parakeets, and their Parakeet king, who wants to take over the dream realm from Mahido's uncle and bend it to his own will. But he can't pass the test of balancing the delicate stones that need to be restacked in order for the realm to survive, because he's basically unintuitive and lacking in imagination. And maybe it's something akin to what Miyazaki sees as modern cinema. All show, all tie-in, all titillation, but becoming more and more artistically bankrupt and hollow. The Parakeet King's rash action, in fact, in meddling in something he scarcely comprehends, destroys it, sending Mahido and his friends for the exits at the climax of the film. The great uncle is a facet, perhaps, of Miyazaki himself through the looking glass, just as Mahido is another, at two times of life. And the uncle wants Mahido to take the reign of the towers, the dream realm, the one who restacks the 13 stones to form the basis of the realm, the dream factory, in a sense. But he can't convince Mahido to do that, echoing Miyazaki's famous roadblocks in finding an heir to his own dream factory, Ghibli Studios. Mahido instead has taken up his own unique stone, the one that calls to him. He's put it in his pocket, realizing he has his own stories to tell, his own future to investigate, and he's guided back to the Hall of Doorways within the tower, which is a sort of nexus of lifetimes and timelines and storylines, and Himi shows him the doorway back to his own life, while she must head back to her own door. The fire spirit Himi turns out to be a manifestation of his mother, and must return to her own time, just before Mahido's time, to become his mother in a sort of beautiful, bittersweet gesture. Now, the film's called The Boy and the Heron, so what's up with the heron, right? He's a type of spirit guide who is sometimes lovely, other times obscene, and a sounding board for Mahido's evolution toward engaging with life again on his own terms. In our world, he's seen as a majestic bird, and as Mahido progresses on his quest, he becomes a sad little man in a bird suit, and another way for Mahido to see beneath the surface once again, from appearance to substance, and not always for the better, it seems. But eventually Mahido calls the bird his friend, because he's helped him forge human connections once again, which Mahido was sadly lacking in his depression. Frankly, for a movie called The Boy and the Heron, I was a little surprised at how small a role the heron actually plays sometimes here. And it should be no surprise, then, that the actual title of this film in Japanese is, in fact, How Do You Live? Which makes more sense for the story, with Mahido struggling to find himself and rationalize his own existence after his mother's tragedy, and his self-scarring, both physical and emotional. He goes from desperately trying to force meaning or identity into his own head by way of the rock at the beginning, to a more subtle and nuanced understanding of the building blocks of character and meaning while on his journey, through stories, through living, where meaning must be more carefully cultivated. He's eventually able to go on in his own lifetime with the raw materials for telling stories, creating beautiful worlds without malice, one of Miyazaki's credos, whereas the Parrot King, for instance, can only try to mimic what's already been told or created without any sort of individual creative spark or synthesis. Again, two types of meaning or storytelling, with Miyazaki showing a clear preference for one over the other. Bittersweet because it may mean Ghibli Studios ends with him, without a successor. So is this final-ish movie from Ghibli meant for the kids? Is it good for your next daddy-daughter movie night? Oh, no. No. Not for my kid anyway, who's 9 now and probably would have been traumatized by it. But the movie is for the kid in you, as an adult looking back on your development. Now, that's not to say there isn't magic here that would appeal to kids, but I know mine would have been also maybe bored a bit with the abstraction of the film. It's pretty abstract at times, and though beautiful, it's also at times violent and disturbing, even grotesque. It's very honest about life in a way we try to meter out to kids a bit more slowly, perhaps, in our culture. And in particular, the depictions of self-harm were a no-go for us. But your mileage may vary. So what if you want the deeper meaning of a film like The Boy and the Heron for your family movie night? Now, I'm by no means a Miyazaki expert. I have several films I haven't even seen yet. And while we've talked a bit about My Neighbor Totoro, thematically, I tie this film also to Kiki's Delivery Service, where a young girl, who's a young witch, comes into her own by leaving home and finding herself in a new setting. Kiki must also wrestle with the loss of her powers and thus her identity, and recapture it by the end through allowing herself to feel connected to the world and to people as they are, and not as she would have them. She finds her humanity, in essence, along with her heroism, in a film that's much more accessible to younger viewers, and older viewers, frankly, where you can watch and enjoy it without your built-in symbolism alarm going off randomly to distract you. There's a time and a place for that, as this film underscores, but for movie night, maybe not. But that only reinforces a final, very important theme in The Boy and the Heron about time and about our lives and our abilities to examine our own lives, to experience life in three dimensions, as it were. The anticipation of our youth, perhaps, the living of our life, and then the examination afterwards, or meditation, perhaps, on our lives from whatever point in it we find ourselves. And Miyazaki seems to address that with his tower, that crossroads for every time of life and every perspective of every life, and gives us an appreciation for the richness of our stories. And in a semi-autobiographical film, he's submitting, humbly I think, that all his films are an expression of that appreciation of life. Some accessible to a mature perspective, others accessible more to children, or to us when we're feeling like children. And that acknowledgement of the entire human journey, I think, is more than we can wish for from any one artist. So this film is a wonderful capper to a wonderful life in art, if indeed it is his last film. Now, some say the 13 stones that the great uncle stacks here are Miyazaki's 13 major works, his films, all entwined but unique. And given that interpretation, I'm thinking, as far as your next family movie night, that yes, Kiki's Delivery Service would be the most appropriate for the young viewers who aren't ready for The Boy and the Heron yet, but will be someday. And of course, that's the point. So check out that one with your kids, and then on your own, check out The Boy and the Heron while it's still in theaters, if possible. Time's running out. I'll link to some more scholarly deep dives into symbolism and meaning in Miyazaki below, in case you're hungry for that. It's pretty interesting, heady stuff sometimes, but you don't always need that to enjoy a well-made film. So that's it for me. Thanks for watching. For Daddy-Daughter Movie Night, take care, and we'll see you soon. Hey, someone bought me a coffee. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look down in the description and you'll see that you can support this channel for the price of a cup of coffee with no long-term commitments. This time it was someone who left their name as someone anonymously, and in this case your email was your name. So I happen to know who it was, a dear old friend, and I will just use your first name, Susan. Thank you so much for tuning in here and for supporting the channel. We drink a lot of coffee, and this one is from you. Thank you so much.